Hi, this is John Burness talking, hopefully for not too long, and I just want to give a in-depth explanation towards one of my poems that I published online recently that I feel is worth talking about, because not only did this mean a lot to me, this work, but it features some pretty heavy, pretty sensitive autobiographical elements. But before I do any of that, I just want to preface this with sort of a warning that I will be talking about extremely disturbing, highly infuriating topics, such as child abuse, long-term false imprisonment, herd mentality, really just the absolute worst that humanity has to offer. I can't even really think of anything worse than those. But so if you happen to be faint of heart, I would really just watch this with an open mind, or if you're really, really sensitive, get damaged by these topics, I would skip this. Poem, along with many of my works, especially my early stuff, was inspired by a true crime case that had a very profound negative mental impact on me. It was the case of Sylvia, who was kind of taken into a foster situation. It wasn't that simple. There was more to it than that, but long story short, her and her twin sister, Jenny, were put in long-term foster care by a very mentally unstable woman named Gertrude Banaszewski, who had 5 or 6 other kids that she was raising, or not really raising, because she wasn't at the time. So they took Sylvia and her sister in because she was friends with her other children. And I guess the main culprit, Gertrude Banaszewski, took out all of her insecurities because she was a very mentally unstable person. I'm pretty sure was an alcoholic, definitely had at least a couple personality disorders, unstable relationships. She had all of her kids with several different people, I believe. And she took out all of her anger on Sylvia, who was only 16 years old at the time. So for 3 months, Sylvia was held captive in the basement of this house and exposed to the worst treatment you could possibly fathom on a human being. Those details I will leave out. If you really want to know, you can read about it. In fact, I do happen to have a physical copy of the most famous book about this case, titled The House of Evil, the Indiana Torture Slaying, because this happened in Indianapolis, Indiana in 1965, and there's a picture of Sylvia right there. So for 3 months, she was held captive against her will and exposed to the worst treatment you can possibly fathom, and stuff that you can't fathom. And all of this extreme abuse, this extreme physical and mental damage, really just resulted in her death. She died, I believe, from subdural hematoma and shock, because her skin, when her body was found, her skin was filled with cigarette burns that were inflicted. So it's very, very traumatizing. I first came across it. So this all happened in early 2020, only a few months after I first started writing poetry, when I finally decided I was going to give it a shot. And right before COVID broke out, I watched the movie about it, that has starring Ellen Page, or Elliot Page, as they are referred to now, as well as James Franco and I forget the actor's name, but the person from Peter Pan, the live-action Peter Pan. And the movie is called An American Crime. It's a highly upsetting movie. I actually had a relative of mine. I invited a relative of mine to watch it with me just so they can sort of get an understanding as to what caused this sort of mental breakdown I was going through at the time, and we couldn't finish the movie. And that movie showed a 50th, a 100th of what actually happened in that basement. And there's some articles that says this, and I totally agree. If that film showed 1/10 of what actually happened, it would have been an unwatchable movie. It would have had no artistic value, no real lessons to be learned. It's just beyond that point. It's nice to have shock value here and there, but you become mentally broken by this stuff long term. It leaves you crippled, doesn't really wake you up like the good shock value does. It cripples you. It closes you off. It doesn't open you up. So this was the start of a very prolonged mental breakdown I had, where I started drinking a lot. And I was only about 17, 18 years old at the time. So I developed a drinking problem at a very young age, which thankfully I've overcome. And I'm a few years, coming 2 years without any drink of alcohol. And it's my proudest accomplishment in life so far. So this is the inspiration behind a lot of poems and songs that I've written throughout my life, most of which they were available online to the public, but I've taken them down because I'm really ashamed of a lot of my creative work up until 2024. I think pretty much every creative thing I've done until 2024 is shit. It's not worth indulging. I don't understand why I created it. I regret creating it. I definitely did not have the right mentality of, I was obsessed with novelty over sincerity, which is my biggest regret in my creative career, is novelty at the expense of sincerity. I really regret that mentality. It was not a productive route at all for me personally. It might have worked for other people, but it absolutely did not work for me. And so when I was in my heyday of being traumatized by this story, I had a very, very vivid dream where I saw not Sylvia Likens herself, but I saw her spirit hovering over this spring. And I live in an area with a lot of springs, so that probably would be natural to have that. And for some reason, there was this huge emphasis on a clay pot falling on the spring and being shattered by the spring instead of falling into the water, but it was shattered by the water. I remember it clear as day. The water was very black in the dream. And then I woke up, and I made an album about that dream. It's called When the Clay Pot Shatters Below the Spring, which I don't recommend. Yeah, please do not listen to it, because it was made in the heyday of that mentality that I really regret having, of how can I make something cute and novel and funky, but it came totally at the expense of honesty and sincerity and originality and firmly believing in something. So I really stepped outside of my own nature doing that. So I'm not proud of the album in retrospect. And it's kind of hard mentally dealing with it, as an artist. They say, shame is the mark of a great man, hopefully. They say being ashamed of who you used to be is very healthy for you. So hopefully that's true. But I really nothing I did before 2024 is worthwhile to me, in my mind. So I don't regret the album because I think it's shit. But I like this poem that I made recently about it. And this poem I'm going to talk about, which is about the dream as well, but I think this is a lot better because, A, it's a lot more true to my vision, but even more importantly, B, it has it's productive. It's going in a direction that people are not used to, which I think is important as well. So it's in this form, this type of poetry called permutation poetry, which I've been doing for, I think, over a year now. I've been doing sound poetry for almost 2 years, and permutation poetry, I think I've been doing a little, I think I did sound poetry before I did permutation poetry. So permutation poetry was popularized by Brian Geisen, who was someone that is too difficult to define in one sentence. So I recommend you just look him up, because I don't think anything I say is going to be accurate, because he's so hard. He's one of those people that's impossible to define in one sentence. Brion, last name Gysin. I believe so. And of course, a huge inspiration for me going in this direction of permutation poetry is Bob Cobbing. This is his physical book of his, I believe this was meant to be his archive after he died. It's called Book. That's the name of it. Yeah, the life and work of Bob Cobbing. There's some really fancy, really incredible mind-opening stuff in here. It's one of my prized possessions with poetry. I mean, obviously, I would recommend people with poetry to buy it. If you're a classicist, I would definitely not recommend you buy it. But if you're going in that sort of direction of new forms of poetry, then it's definitely worth checking out. So those were kind of the two people that inspired this particular poem, and really those two people were the reason I started it. I just thought it was really, I thought it had room for growth, and I could be that conduit, that bridge between turning this from an obscure form of art that people laugh at to something that, this actually has the potential to be revered almost. And hopefully I could be that. I still do. I still hope that. And so I made the permutation as it was. So I started with, and of course the subtitle is Ecclesiastes 12:6. And there was a time right after this nervous breakdown in late 2021 that I started becoming really religious, because, sometimes a lot of people in their lowest point turn to religion. And I guess I'm no exception to that. And I was reading Ecclesiastes a lot during this time, and I must tell you, I'm not a Christian really anymore. To me, there's too many horrible things that have been done in the name of it to proudly proclaim that I am a Christian. There's too much evil has been done in the name of it for me to associate with it. But I've always loved Ecclesiastes. It's always been one of the more intelligible books in the Bible. Something that I still kind of look to this day. There's still parts of the Bible I read quite a lot, but it's like what Shakespeare said. The devil can find verses he likes in the Bible. It's all cherry picking. There's nothing absolute about it, despite what everyone is saying, despite what every Christian says. So when I was reading Ecclesiastes, I remember I was at the house I was living in at the time. I was reading Ecclesiastes with my roommates nearby, and who were all really religious too. And I remember reading Ecclesiastes 12:6, and the dream I had, and I never read this part of Ecclesiastes before. And keep in mind, a year and a half back, I had that vivid dream, that very vivid dream of a clay pot falling onto a black spring and shattering. And it says in Ecclesiastes 12:6, when the pitcher shatters of the spring. Still to this day, one of the strangest coincidences of my life. And I've had a lot of strange coincidences. I don't understand how that could happen, but it did. And so, when you walk around and think of creative ideas all day, naturally this idea of a poem began to alchemize. So why don't I start with Ecclesiastes 12:6? And I started with that, and I decided to use the New American Translation, which is far and away my favorite Bible translation, and it's always the one I use whenever I do anything related to the Bible. It's the most clearly written, and it's the one where you'll ask yourself the least, what does this mean? So that's why I like the New American Version. So I did the New American Version of Ecclesiastes 12:6. And my rule of thumb is I want to make no bigger change per line than either eliminating one word or adding one word. And then I turned it into Sylvia something, and I didn't know what to end it with. And another thing I've been practicing regularly is this Hawaiian technique of self-forgiveness. It's called Ho'oponopono. H-O''O''O''P-O''N''O. P-O-N-O. I have an episode of my web series, Inalienable Paradise, talking about it. It's a very, very important thing that I think people should know about. And it's sort of a, it's become diluted as more and more practitioners are using it and teaching it. But the modern version of a Ho'oponopono has sort of a quadrant phrasing, or mantras, and they are, I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you, I love you. And the modern tradition is to say those repeatedly. But I have no reason to believe that that's the classical version of it, the native Hawaiian version, but that's the popular version. And I thought that's the way to end it. Why don't I gradually turn that into Sylvia this, Sylvia that, Sylvia, I'm sorry, Sylvia, please forgive me, Sylvia, I love you, Sylvia, thank you. And that's how the poem finished, finally. And it's it's an iceberg work of mine where if you look at the work in and of itself, there's a lot more that's not said about it than that is said about it, and that's why I wanted to make this video. I felt it was important to make and talk about all this, because I think it's important. And that's how this poem ended. I still am affected by this story to this day. Thankfully, I'm not crippled by it like I used to be. I have learned to cope and all that. I am sort of in the process of trying to finish a soundscape piece about it, which hopefully will be finished soon. And I felt I was in the right direction with this from a poetic standpoint, because I really think one of the worst things you can do with poetry is when you write about a specific historical thing or an ethical thing, some victim of injustice that you're writing about. I think it's a really, really bad approach to write through their point of view. I think that's incredibly naive, and because there's no matter what, you are not that person, no matter what, and their experience, no matter how similar externally their life is to yours, it's still a universe of difference, because they're a different you. And so my approach now with poetry is whenever I do write about things that I think, when I write about sensitive topics like this, like people who were victims of child abuse, people victims of any injustice, I feel a much wiser way to turn this and alchemize this into poetry is to write about your reaction to it. I think that's far more productive than, some sort of fictional, and that's why I'm not a big fan of the movie anymore either. The movie completely took the piss on this and came up with this fake ending where the other children helped her escape, which never happened, which is just so insulting to me. Yeah, but because that's the other extreme. I'm really not a fan of fictionalizing real stories too, because the effects it had on the people in the story and the people affected by the story are very real, more real than more real than reality. Really, it's about as real as it gets. And that was, so I feel that's why I'm not really ashamed of this poem in comparison to everything else I've done about this true crime, this horrible story, because I don't think it's productive to internalize what somebody else is going through that's not you, that doesn't have all of the foundational moments and memories and convictions and volitions that you have. No matter what, you will never be that person. So that's why I'm not ashamed. I think writing about your reaction to it is a far better, far more productive way to go. And almost running out of time. So I think that's about the extent of what I'm going to talk about with this poem. I hope you took something away from this. I hope it wasn't overtly intense, even though it probably is. Hopefully this was productive to somebody, and you will see a lot more from me, creative work, in terms of creative output. And thank you very much. Be good to each other. And as they say in Hawaiian, me ka mahalo, which means with gratitude. Thank you.